Good morning, Big Ten fans. Welcome back to another edition of the Big Ten Morning Minutes. I am your host, Michael Chen. Give me a follow on the Twitter machines, MFC2123. It is Monday, March 18th, 2019, the day after Selection Sunday. We'll get started with all of that news right away, as well as the Big Ten was the conference that put the most teams into the tournament yesterday. They had a good showing. I think everything went the way I thought it would. Obviously, Ohio State was the final seed at 11, and unfortunately for Indiana, they missed out in the tournament, but they did make the a number one seed in the NIT. Nebraska also made the NIT as well. Those are two teams that I didn't think were going to make the NCAA tournament, so it kind of remains to be seen what goes on with that. But the teams that made the tournament, pretty good showing at the top. You have two number two seeds in the University of Michigan and Michigan State. Michigan State did win the conference title. They beat the Wolverines in that one by 5 points in what was a fantastic tournament. And unfortunately, from what it looked like, that didn't make much of a difference in the eyes of the committee. I've always been one that says that the Big Ten, for some odd reason, I think they get punished for playing all of their games at the end. Obviously, the Big Ten football championship game, that's the last championship game of the day. And then the Big Ten tournament was the last championship game of the day. And it happens every year, I believe. And unfortunately, it's just, I don't know why, but it just never works out well for the Big Ten in those. And I would love to take a look into it a little bit harder, which I might, because it kind of boggles my mind a little bit. But anyways, back to the seedings. Purdue got a 3 seed, Wisconsin got a 5 seed, Maryland a 6. Minnesota and Iowa land at 10 seed, the aforementioned Ohio State with the 11 seed. So we'll see if any of these teams can advance far and potentially make the Final Four. I think the 2 seeds in Michigan and Michigan State most likely have the best odds to make it, just due to the fact that I believe their 2 teams are 2 of the best in the country. And I think Purdue got a pretty good draw as well within the bracket. So there is potential for the Big Ten to make some noise, but when you look overall in the country, you see that the ACC got 4, count them, 4 number ones. They had Duke, North Carolina, and Virginia. So although they didn't pace the play of the rest of the country with the number of bids, they sure were the most impressive conference out there with 3 number ones, the other one going to Gonzaga. So with the news that Nebraska made the NIT, AD Bill Moos, he's going to decide what's going to go on for Tim Miles' fate. Although shorthanded in the Big Ten tournament, Miles still kind of on the hot seat is what it looks like. So I think Athletic Director Moos much happier about the fact that they did make a postseason tournament, although you could potentially see a move being made on the bench if Tim Miles doesn't serve them for what they thought that he was going to be. I understand that the bid was big, regardless of whether it was NCAA or NIT, for the athletic director, and we'll see what they end up going forward. So it's going to be pretty interesting to see that. And then the other team that made the NIT, Indiana, they didn't have the best weekend, obviously losing in the first round to Ohio State. And then the news on Friday afternoon, the small forward Keon Brooks announced his commitment to Kentucky. So they missed out on him as well. So, again, not the best weekend over there for the Hoosiers. We'll see what ends up happening, as they're going to be that 1 seed in the NIT. We'll see if their minds are back into it and we'll find out if they're able to continue playing at a relatively higher level, or at least according to the NIT, due to the fact that they were a 1 seed. And then real quick, going back to the Spartans, Kyle Ahrens in the championship game against Michigan seemed to have suffered a pretty serious leg injury. Went out, had to be carried out on a stretcher. Then he did return later on in the second half on crutches. He seemed to be in higher spirits, so the injury scare might be not as bad as initially thought. However, it's still bad going into the tournament. They just got him back. He's had injury issues all year, back injury. Again, you kind of thought Michigan State was getting healthy, getting ready for a run at a Final Four, and then obviously Aaron's suffering that injury. But getting Nick Ward back is pretty significant as well, and Cassius Winston is obviously one of the best players in all of the country. And speaking of Cassius Winston, 24/7 Sports announced their All-American team, and Cassius Winston was the only player to place the first or second team. There was honorable mentions to Purdue's Carson Edwards and Wisconsin's Ethan Happ. So, although there's not that high-end talent, actually I was talking with a score reporter and host, David Schuster, about this on Saturday. We talked because he was at the tournament for a few days. In the Big Ten, they've got good players, but there's no high-end NBA players that either one of us really thought. There's not really that guy that stands out. There are some talented players, including Jeremy Langford for Indiana. You've got Ayo Dosunmu, who are going to show up on some draft boards, although Carson Edwards will, and so will Cassius Winston. But if they were high-end NBA players, they wouldn't be hanging around until their senior seasons. So, although the Big Ten looks pretty good on paper, I think that there is a talent depth that isn't quite at the level of, say, an ACC. So, I'd love for the conference to get on the recruiting a little bit harder and try to get those super elite one and dones there. But again, that's a risky movement to make, because it could leave your teams in dire need if you miss out on those one and dones and you've got a short amount of scholarship players that are older and that just aren't at the level that they should be. So it's still pretty interesting going on there, and kind of part of that is the recruits that they bring in, which leads me to Justin Pierce. He's going to be a transfer from William & Mary. There are some schools inside the conference that are looking for his services, including Ohio State, Michigan, Illinois, Northwestern, and Wisconsin. They've all reached out. But again, look, you're going after a grad transfer from William & Mary. This is the Big Ten. Again, it's a talent thing. Granted, I don't know much about Justin Pierce, but I still think that the talent level needs to increase, kind of similar to what's happened in the football programs. When they noticed that, obviously, when Urban Meyer came over from the SEC, they needed to step their game up, and you saw a lot of schools start to do that. I think that needs to happen on the basketball side as well. So we'll see if the trend continues to stay the way it is, or if teams are recruiting a little bit more high-end talent going that way. And so that's a good segue to move over to the football side of things. There was some interesting news, and we'll start off with that news that happened on Friday. Michigan State got a commitment for their 20 class in Tommy Guarjaro, and that commitment was a pretty interesting one, as the Notorious Big Podcast, hosted by Alan Trieu and Steve Wiltfong, Guarjaro actually announced his commitment while being a guest on the show. Pretty interesting way to do it, although Guarjaro not necessarily set in stone to play tight end. He's being recruited a little bit more as an athlete. He could end up on the other side of the ball. It's the second commit of the class for Mark D'Antonio and the Spartans. And we all know how well D'Antonio does in producing defensive talent. So if Guarjaro doesn't pan out for the offensive side, I'm sure he would be able to bulk up and make a pretty solid defensive end. PJ Fleck added a player to his 20 class as well this past weekend in Kansas running back K.Y. Thomas. He is the highest rated commit for them. They have 4 commits in the class, 25th overall in the country, 7th in the conference. So when you're looking at Fleck having the 7th best class in the country, in the conference, which is 25th in the country. Again, that's going back to what I was talking about with recruiting talent inside the conference. In order for them to compete nationally, you have to get the elite players and higher end players. And it makes me really happy to see that more than half of the conference right now is sitting in the top 25 for the 2020 class. I really like that. I think that that's some good momentum that the conference is going, and we'll see that momentum continue, hopefully, throughout the rest of the spring, summer, fall, and up to the early signing period later on this year. Lovie Smith, we've documented the fact that he's been unable to grab that transfer wide receiver. He got spurned twice this year. Once Jeff Thomas initially committed to come home, then with the coaching change at Miami, staying with Manny Diaz, and also A.D. Miller, he was originally opting to leave Oklahoma, which didn't make a ton of sense to me because Oklahoma throws the ball a whole hell of a lot. And Miller also decided to say, hey, you know what, Lovey, I'm going to stay at Oklahoma because I like this situation. We have Spencer Rattler coming in, and you've also got Jalen Hurts, the former Alabama quarterback, coming in as well. And hey, when a school produces back-to-back Heisman trophies and back-to-back potential number 1 overall picks at quarterback, there's not much reason as a wide receiver or offensive skill player to leave at that place. So I understand why those guys did it, but hopefully this time Richmond's Dejon Brissett is not going to do that to Lovey. It does look like Brissett's pretty solid in his commitment to the Fighting Illini. So you'll see Brissett on the field this coming fall for Lovie Smith. And I hope that this one works out well for them because they need some of that offensive talent. They lost a lot. And I think that this is good for them. I think that the grad transfer market has worked pretty well for the whole conference, and hopefully this one works out well for the Fighting Illini. That's going to do it for me this morning on your Big Ten Morning Minutes. I appreciate the listen. Get ready for a wild, wild week here with obviously the tournament starting and the NIT starting on Tuesday, so there's going to be plenty of news coming out soon, so bear with me. Give us a follow on our Facebook website, please. The website of Facebook, I'm sure you've heard of it. Please make sure that you give us a like on that. Give us a like on other platforms as well, such as the Twitter machines at 2 Cents Pod. You can follow me at MFC2123. I appreciate the listen and have a great day, Big Ten fans.